Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining me for my second event on spiritual crisis and the power of prayer. I chose this topic because I thought it was one of the most timely topics I could possibly present today. Spiritual crises, in my opinion, occur in epidemic proportions in our society, and for the most part, I think go unrecognized. So I thought this evening I would introduce spiritual crisis. I will describe what it's like to be in a spiritual crisis, because it's oftentimes, you might think that they oftentimes present as a psychological, the symptomology is so often the same. But the underlying reason for a spiritual crisis is different than what erupts in a psychological emotional crisis. How you want to treat this, how you want to respond to it would be very different. So, and I suspect, because I know my audience, that many of you, once you listen to this, might identify more with the events happening in your spirit or your soul more than just psychological depression. So let me begin this way with a larger view, and then we'll go into the symptomology and the causes for spiritual crises, and then how to respond to that. And amazingly, we're going to try and get this all into an hour or maybe a little more. We're going to back up. When I was actively doing medical intuitive work, and seeing people all the time, and then into my workshops all the time, it didn't occur to me early on to look for spiritual crisis symptoms, to even think in that language. But what I eventually became so aware of was that so many people were coping with depression and anxiety and sufferings, what I would call sufferings of the soul. But that's not how they languaged it. That's not how most people would language it. I never had anyone say to me, I've come to take your workshop because my soul's in crisis. That's not a language. That's not something anyone would say to me. But people did say, I suffer from chronic depression. I have anxiety problems. And through the decades, what became apparent to me is that we are people of the interior world. We have, through the decades, the last 5, 6, 7 decades, we've shifted our focus to self-empowerment, self-help, the inner self. We've become inwardly focused. And that has changed the way we speak about ourselves. That has changed our values. That has changed how that's changed our inner vocabulary. We speak more in psychological language, more in therapeutic language, more in emotional language. So the frontier behind our eye, the world behind our eye, if you will, is like the new frontier. And so this interior life is of great value to us. And there was a time, like for me, the great dividing point really is World War II, when we entered the nuclear age and pre-nuclear age. It really is the dividing line between the generations of who we are and how people were prior to then. And prior to then, survival was all a matter of the physical world. after the nuclear age, and as we advanced through the 60s and 70s and 80s, we included in survival our interior life. And we developed the body, mind, spirit template. We just began to do the holistic health model, and we saw that there was a connection between the energetics of our nature, our energetic anatomy, and our physical anatomy. So we really retemplated ourselves and began a brand new understanding of how it is we function and who we are, and what our energetic nature is like. And so included in that transition was a shift in how we, in the length of life, the values, and how we wanted to pursue our independence. I mean, a whole lot of things changed on our inner calculus and our calculations for what made up a healthy, happy human life. If you look at your grandparents or your parents, it wouldn't have occurred to them to be able to go into a bookstore and buy and look and find hundreds of books on how to be happy and what is happiness, how to be fulfilled. That never would have happened. But now you have whole sections, whole bookstores on self-fulfillment. That's our focus, is on the self and who we are and what we want and the importance of fulfilling that self. And that's critical to understanding how much our values have shifted and how much they have changed, and how we've pointed the arrow from the outside world to the world behind our eye. So, and while I could go on and take that subject apart in small details, and it's so fascinating, you get the picture here. Now, that inner world has always been a part of the human experience. But for the most part, the diving into the inner world and the examination of the inner world and the questions of the inner world and the soul, etc., these were done within monastic and university settings for centuries. They weren't done by everybody all over the world. That wasn't what it was. It was done within the monastic settings and the universities, and so people who had access to refined methods of thinking, whose lives were devoted to asking questions like, what is the meaning and purpose of life? Because those were these great cosmic questions that changed the direction of a person's life. These were not ordinary sized questions. These were the game changers. What is the purpose of life? What has value? What is the power of the human soul? These were the questions that weren't ordinary. Here's an ordinary question. Where'd you get this cup? That's an ordinary question. What is the purpose of my life? Is not an ordinary question. And prior to these years that we're living, prior to the pursuit of the self, that was not a mainstream question. That was a question that kind of was restricted to those who had the luxury to ask the question, to those who had the luxury to pursue the answer and could handle the answer to that question. And I do mean handle the answer to that question. Now, today, it's more the case that It's the most ordinary question asked by people who, paradoxically, are in search of the extraordinary. They ask the most extraordinary question, not realizing that it's in fact a prayer. It's a prayer. What is the meaning and purpose of my life? Is in fact a prayer. Cleverly disguised as a question, but it's not. It's a cosmic invocation that says, show me, reveal to me, take me down deep, and reveal to me the reason you gave me life. What am I doing here? What do you want me to do? Why did you send me here now and not 100 years ago and not 100 years from now? Why did you want me here now? Show me that reason. When you dwell on that question and the size of that question, the power of that question, you are saying, I realize my life is not, I can't comprehend that I am an apple that just fell from a tree. I'm asking to know, down to the minute of my birth, why was I born a Sagittarius? Why did I come under Leo? Why was I born in this country and not that country? Why am I a female and not a male? Why? I want, reveal unto me how you put me together and why. Show me other details. From whence did I come? That's the size of that. That's what you're asking. You're asking for soul knowledge to come bubbling up and to make its way into your conscious mind from the warehouse of the eternal. Now, what's usually asked, and here, let me just position this and put you back on the ground for a minute so I can give you the setting for why it creates spiritual crises. So you have an idea in your head, the size of this question. It's at the same time, this culture of ours, this time, has produced a couple of oddities, I guess I would call it. I'm not quite sure what word I would use, but let's use that one. One is that people have a contempt for the ordinary. They find being ordinary to be the most unappealing thing in the world. You know, they cannot bear the thought of doing something ordinary, being something ordinary. They have to just be the most unusual, do the most unusual, and from this has come this notion. And people have said to me for years and years in my workshops, I know I was born for something special. I know I was born for something special. And I've heard parents say to their children, say to me, my child's special, my child's special. My child was born, they're so special. And it's the curse of specialness, and the need to be other than ordinary. So part of the suffering in spiritual crisis is this contempt for the ordinary that makes it so, that causes someone to start imagining that somehow life is disappointing unless it's gargantuanly glamorous, and that the way you measure the success of your life has to be in huge Hollywood terms, or it's nothing at all. It has to be measured in your capacity to be extra, other than ordinary. And what that means, really, at the end of the line, you have to follow this archetypally, is that what makes something ordinary, if you look at nature, if you look at what is ordinary, is that ordinary means it is subject to the laws of nature. Subject to the laws. The operative word is law. It's subject to law. All creatures subject to the law of gravity, the flow of the tides in the ocean, the laws of aging, the laws of life. The ordinary, we're subject to the laws of change. Like Buddha, all things change. Change is constant. You suffer when you try and battle against what needs to change. The cycles of life, death and rebirth, new beginnings, the nature of the phoenix. These are the laws. We're all subject to the laws. To think of yourself as extraordinary means that in some way you think you can transcend the laws, that somehow the laws do not apply to you, and that is the measure of what it means to be extraordinary. And in the early stages of being other than ordinary, this is experienced by the privileges of small things, like I don't have to wait in line, and I don't have to do this, and I can pick up the phone and get the best seat in a restaurant, and small little meaningless things that look like, in Buddha language, they're illusions, but they look like you are extraordinary. But at an conscious level, what it feels like and how you sense it is that you are negotiating the laws of life. That somehow you're negotiating the laws of longevity. That somehow you're negotiating the laws of youth. That somehow you are actually figuring out how to negotiate with the sacred. That's what archetypally this contempt for the ordinary, the striving to be extraordinary, is in its ultimate the belief that you can negotiate the longevity of life and have some kind of clout with the unfolding of life itself.